Today we're going to talk about Crocodile Dundee. I am sorry that my Spider-Man ranking is not up yet, but I still have to watch one more movie to give a complete ranking of that series. So I decided to give you guys this one first, and that one will follow, hopefully, within the next week. This is a series of films that started in 1986 and lasted up until 2001. The film stars Paul Hogan as Crocodile Dundee, as well as Linda Kowalski as his love interest, and essentially shows an outdoorsman named Mick Dundee who hunts crocodiles in his spare time and eventually falls in love with this reporter who's doing a story on him, and that leads to them running into several different adventures throughout the series. I've always been a fan of this series, and though it's not consistently good in quality, I do think that all the films in this series are relatively entertaining. So without further ado, I decided to give you guys my ranking from worst to best. Starting with Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles. The third film in the series, and a belated sequel of sorts, takes place roughly 13 years after the second film. The film shows Mick and his family, which consists of his wife and son, living in Australia, and Sue gets a job opportunity and they decide to go to Los Angeles. Along the way, they discover there's these art thieves who are working in Hollywood, and it's up to Michael J. Crocodile Dundee, and with the help of his wife and his friend Jacko, who was actually played by an actor who played a previous villain in part two, but I guess when you're friends with producers, you get recast in movies. And the story of this one is just kind of nonsensical. I don't hate this movie. I actually think that it was kind of nice to see Paul Hogan in the role one last time. And though I do think that this one's more kid friendly and more silly, and it's PG just like the second film, it's an okay little movie. But unlike the second film, which was 80s PG, this is 2001 PG, so there's really no bite to this movie. Really no language, hardly any action that really reaches the heights of the first film. The comedy's a little bit silly, but some of it's just kind of cheesy. It's okay for what it is. A late belated sequel where you get to see these characters you like one more time in a not so great adventure. It is unfortunate that the series had to go out on kind of a low note, and I do wish they had made a fourth film, but unfortunately it never happened. Still an okay movie, and I think not as nearly as bad as the critics make it out to be. Coming in at second place is Crocodile Dundee 2. That's right, folks, it's one of those lists. The second film to me is very frustrating. It's one of the most frustrating movies I can think of, and here's why. The first half of this movie is really solid, and I mean really solid. I really enjoy the setup, I enjoy the comedy, everything is on point. It feels like a perfect sequel in the first hour. More on that in a minute. This film basically sees these villains who have ties to drugs and other illegal activities, taking out a journalist who had worked with Sue in the past. This leads to them kidnapping Sue, and he gets her back, and they decide to retreat to Australia because things are too dangerous, in an attempt to not only protect themselves, but also try to stop these villains. It's kind of an interesting premise to have villains in the Crocodile Dundee series, because the first film didn't really have a villain, but for 2 and 3 they decided to make it Crocodile Dundee more of an action star, I suppose. It really works for the character, but that leads me to the negative of this movie, and that's the second half. Once they decide to go to Australia to get away from the villains, who end up following them to Australia anyway, but I think that was their plan all along, the film just kind of loses its focus. Instead of like killing these bad guys, it shows him capturing them all and tying them up and messing with them in different silly ways, like sending bats on them and making them think that crocodiles are attacking when they're not really. It's just kind of hokey and not really action focused. You could show just how I would have done it is just show Crocodile Dundee kicking these dudes' ass and making you think that they're dead, and then at the end reveal that they're just tied up and stored away somewhere. Whereas the movie just shows them, pretty much captured right away after they get taken out one by one. So it's like basically watching a Rambo movie, with this really skilled guy taking out these dudes one by one, but, he's not killing them or anything. I'm not saying Crocodile Dundee has to be a killer, but there's so much filler in the way that they handle it, and there's just no real tension. Half the time he's just messing with these dudes, and then every now and then he'll, take one out. But then the actual ending of the movie happens, and I won't give it away here, but it actually is pretty action-packed and actually intense, and there's actually some bodies. Some people actually get killed. So for me, there actually is a nice bit of tension at the very end. If I had made this movie, or if I could like re-edit it, I would just cut out all the scenes that shows the guys tied up. That way you just think they're being taken out one by one, and then at the end, just show that they were captured all along, kind of in a misleading manner. So the film still has like some edge to it. It makes Crocodile Dundee look more badass. And get rid of the dumb scenes like the ones where the bats are chasing the guys and stuff like that. That was kind of a long rant on this movie, but it could have been great, but due to bad pacing and a longer runtime than the first film, the second half really lets this movie down. I still very much enjoy this film, but I really wish there was like an editor's cut of this movie. And hopefully one day maybe that'll happen, but I don't see it happening anytime in the near future. But sorry for the long rant, but I had to get that out. But number one would have to be the original Crocodile Dundee. The film basically shows this reporter named Sue who goes to the outback after learning of a man who was attacked by a crocodile, killed said crocodile, and crawled like 100 miles back to civilization to survive. It turns out that story is a little bit embellished, but the man, what she's looking for, actually is a local badass and just all around fun guy named Michael J. Crocodile Dundee. After spending some time with him in the outback, he takes him back to New York to see what it's like to be in a major city outside of the country, the Australian outback, that is. And it's basically a fish out of water story where Mick has to get used to all the crazy things in New York, like taxis and prostitutes and drug dealers and just the busy hustle of a major American city. It's really funny. It's one of my favorite fish out of water movies, and it's just an absolute delight. The ending of the film is just really heartwarming too, and it's one of my favorite romance movies, I think, of the 80s. And it's just highly entertaining all around. A lot of times movies like this are kind of hokey and cheesy, but I think this one holds up very well. The soundtrack is good. The cinematography is great. There's amazing shots of New York. I would never really want to go to New York personally, maybe outside of like visiting. It's just not my kind of place, but this movie does make it look pretty damn awesome. There's even some great shots of the Twin Towers, which are sadly no longer there. And everything about this film just makes New York look really awesome. And the Outback, too, for that matter. The film is basically just one great advertiser for New York and Australia. The film is entertaining. There's a lot of great scenes, a lot of jokes that wouldn't really hold up by today's standards, like the one with the cross-dressing dude in the bar. And I think that really just adds to this film's nature. It's just a fun 80s classic, and one that I really enjoy. Well, that's my list. I know that there are a lot of other 80s comedy franchises out there, but this is one of my favorites. And though the final chapter does leave something to be desired, and the second chapter is a bit frustrating, I still do love this trilogy as a whole, and I think it's a great series from 80s and early 2000s. I thank you all for watching. If you'd like, let me know your favorite Crocodile Dundee film down below, and peace out.